Blackwood Manor stood on a lonely hill. It overlooked the quiet Montgomery Valley. The house was very old. Its stones were dark with rain and time. Ivy climbed its walls like secrets. For generations it was the heart of the Montgomery family, but it was not always a happy heart. Old stories and forgotten arguments seemed to live in its many rooms. They whispered in the long, empty hallways. They sighed in the rustle of the ancient trees that surrounded the estate. The air inside Blackwood Manor often felt heavy. It was thick with unspoken words. It carried the weight of past disagreements. Portraits of Montgomery ancestors lined the grand staircase. Their eyes seemed to watch the living. They judged every action, every word. The furniture was old and covered in dust sheets in some rooms. It was as if time itself had stopped, waiting for something, or perhaps waiting for someone to break the spell of silence and sorrow that held the house captive. The gardens, once famous for their beauty, were now wild. They reflected the neglect within the family. Roses struggled to bloom amidst overgrown weeds. The paths were cracked and uneven. This was a place where joy had once thrived. Now it was a mirror to the sadness that had taken root in the Montgomery line. The wind carried a mournful sound through the branches of the trees. It was a song of what was lost and what might never be found again. Children who grew up near Blackwood Manor often told stories about it. They said it was haunted by the ghosts of arguments past. They spoke of shadowy figures in the windows. They whispered about the coldness that clung to its walls, even on the warmest summer day. The manor was more than just a building. It was a symbol. It was a constant reminder of a family divided. It was a heavy legacy for any young Montgomery to bear. The deep rift in the Montgomery family began with two brothers. Their names were Arthur and Thomas. Arthur was the elder. He was stern and serious. He believed in tradition above all else. He felt the weight of Blackwood Manor and its history. He thought it was his duty to protect it exactly as it had always been. He saw change as a threat, a disrespect to their ancestors and their way of life. His heart was set on preserving the past. Thomas was younger. He was full of new ideas and dreams. He saw Blackwood Manor not as a museum, but as a place that could live and breathe. He wanted to bring new life to the estate. He had plans for modernizing parts of the farm. He wanted to explore new ventures. He believed the legacy was not just in stone, but in growth and adaptation. He felt their father's will, which divided the inheritance, gave him the freedom to pursue these ideas for his share. The disagreement started over their father's will. It was a complex document. It tried to be fair, but left room for different understandings. Arthur believed the main estate, Blackwood Manor itself, should remain untouched, under his primary care. Thomas argued his portion of the inheritance gave him rights to develop his land as he saw fit, even if it changed the landscape Arthur cherished. Their values clashed. Arthur saw Thomas's plans as reckless. Thomas saw Arthur's stance as stubbornly old-fashioned and controlling. Their words became sharp. Accusations flew like angry birds. Love turned to resentment. Respect crumbled into bitterness. "You care nothing for our heritage!" Arthur had shouted one bleak afternoon. Thomas had retorted, his voice strained. "You care more for dust and stone than for the future, or for your own brother." Soon they stopped speaking altogether. A wall of silence rose between them. It was a wall that would cast a long, cold shadow over the next generation. The silence between Arthur and Thomas spread. It crept into their homes. It affected their wives and then their children. Family gatherings, once filled with laughter, ceased to exist. Holidays became separate affairs. Birthdays passed without shared celebration. The Montgomery family, once a close-knit clan, was now two separate islands. Each island was ruled by the quiet sorrow of its respective patriarch. The children grew up knowing there was a part of their family they were not supposed to know. Arthur's children were taught that Uncle Thomas was unreasonable. They heard whispers of his foolish ideas. They learned that he had disrespected their grandfather's memory. Thomas's children, in turn, learned that Uncle Arthur was cold and unyielding. They understood he was someone who could not forgive or forget. These narratives were not spoken loudly, they were implied. They were felt in the sudden hush when a name was mentioned. They were seen in the sad look in their parents' eyes. The cousins, Julian, Arthur's son, and Lily, Thomas's daughter, knew of each other only as distant figures. They were like characters in a story, not real people. They might catch a glimpse of one another in the small town, a brief, awkward eye contact in the market, a hurried nod, if anything at all. There were no shared childhood memories, no games played in the sprawling gardens of Blackwood Manor. No secrets whispered between them. There was only the inherited silence, the unspoken feud. This division created a strange emptiness. It was a missing piece in the puzzle of their family. The children often wondered about the other side. What were their cousins like? What did their uncle truly feel? But these questions remained unasked. They were buried under the weight of their father's unwavering bitterness. The legacy of the feud was not just the loss of land or money, it was the loss of connection. It was the theft of family bonds that should have been their birthright. Julian, Arthur's son, grew up within the imposing walls of Blackwood Manor. He felt the chill of the old house deep in his bones. His father, Arthur, was a man of few words. His presence was often stern. He taught Julian about duty and tradition. He spoke of the importance of preserving the Montgomery name and the estate, but rarely did he speak of joy or of his estranged brother Thomas. When Thomas's name was mentioned, Arthur's face would harden. A shadow would cross his eyes. Julian was a quiet boy. He spent many hours wandering the vast, silent rooms of the manor. He explored the neglected gardens. He often felt like a ghost himself, haunting the edges of his family's unspoken sorrow. He knew there was a rift. He understood it was serious, but the reasons were always vague, shrouded in adult complexities he couldn't quite grasp. He only knew that a part of his family was missing. He sometimes saw Lily from a distance. She seemed like a sunbeam, bright and cheerful, so different from the gloom of Blackwood. He sometimes felt a strange pull towards his uncle's family, a curiosity that he quickly learned to suppress. His father's disapproval was a powerful force. Julian loved his father. He wanted to be a good son. So he accepted the silence. He accepted the division. But a small part of him yearned for something more. He wondered what it would be like to have a cousin to share secrets with. He wondered what stories his Uncle Thomas might tell. As Julian grew older, the weight of Blackwood Manor settled on his shoulders. He was the heir. He was expected to carry on the traditions. He was expected to uphold his father's values. This included maintaining the distance from Thomas's side of the family. The feud became his inheritance too. It was a heavy, invisible cloak he wore. He felt trapped by the past, by a quarrel that was not his own, yet defined so much of his young life. Section 5. Lily's Echoes, a Distant Understanding. Lily, Thomas's daughter, grew up in a smaller, brighter home. Her father, Thomas, was more open with his emotions than Arthur. He was often cheerful. He loved to laugh. But even in their warm household, the shadow of the feud lingered. Lily knew about her Uncle Arthur. She knew about Blackwood Manor. Her father spoke of his brother with a sadness that Lily found confusing. There was no anger in his voice, just a deep, lingering hurt. It was a sorrow that never quite left him. Lily was a curious and empathetic child. She couldn't understand why families would choose to stay apart. She heard stories about Blackwood Manor. It sounded like a castle from a fairy tale, but a sad one. She often wondered about her cousin Julian. She imagined him living a lonely life in the grand old house. She saw him occasionally in town. He always looked so serious, so burdened. Her heart went out to him, this cousin she had never truly met. Her father, Thomas, never forbade her from thinking about Arthur or Julian, but he didn't encourage contact either. "It's complicated, Lilybug," he would say with a sigh. "Some hurts run too deep." Lily tried to understand. She pieced together bits of conversation. She knew the fight was about the family land and different ideas. She felt her father's pain. She wished she could do something to make it better. But she was just a child, on the other side of a wall of silence. Lily carried a sense of hope within her. She believed that broken things could be mended. She saw the good in people. She didn't fully accept that the feud was permanent. She held on to a quiet wish. A wish that one day the Montgomery family could be whole again. This wish stayed with her as she grew. It was a small, flickering candle in the darkness of the long-standing family division. She hoped for a bridge across the chasm of bitterness. Section 6. The wilting garden, a symbol of decay. At the heart of Blackwood Manor lay what was once its greatest pride, the Montgomery Rose Garden. Generations of Montgomery women had tended it. It was a place of vibrant colour and sweet fragrance. It symbolised the family's beauty, its endurance, its love. Arthur's mother, and Thomas's too, had adored this garden. She had spent countless hours there. She had taught both her sons the names of the roses. It held memories of happier times before the silence fell between them. But with the passing years and the deepening feud, the garden had been forgotten. Arthur, lost in his stoic preservation of the house, had no heart for flowers. His wife had tried for a time, but the sadness of the place overwhelmed her. Thomas, barred from the main estate, could only remember its beauty from afar. Now the once magnificent garden was a shadow of its former self. Thorny, untamed canes reached out like desperate arms. Weeds choked the life from delicate blooms. The paths were obscured. The decline of the garden was slow, almost unnoticed at first, but one late summer its state became starkly apparent. A blight had struck many of the remaining ancient rose bushes. Their leaves curled and blackened. Their petals fell like tears onto the parched earth. The scent of decay hung heavy in the air, replacing the once sweet perfume. The garden looked as if it were dying. It was a painful, visible symbol of the decay within the Montgomery family itself, a testament to years of neglect and unresolved sorrow. News of the garden's dire condition reached Thomas through quiet village gossip. Even Arthur, in his solitary walks, could not ignore the desolation. The sight of the dying roses stirred something in both men, a flicker of an old shared memory. For their children, Julian and Lily, who had only heard tales of its past glory, the dying garden presented an unexpected, poignant crisis. It was more than just wilting flowers. It was a piece of their shared heritage fading into oblivion. Section 7, Seeds of Change, an unexpected partnership. Lily heard about the blighted rose garden from a concerned villager. Her heart ached at the news. She remembered her father speaking of his mother's roses with such fondness. An idea sparked within her. It was bold, it was perhaps foolish, but she felt compelled to act. She decided she would try to save the garden, but she knew she could not do it alone. She needed access to Blackwood Manor. She needed help. She needed Julian. Gathering all her courage, Lily approached Julian. She found him near the old stone wall that marked the boundary between their father's properties. He was surprised to see her there, speaking to him directly. She explained her concern for the garden. She spoke of its importance to their grandmother. She proposed they work together. It was part of her, of both our fathers, Lily said, her voice earnest. Maybe we could bring it back together. Julian listened, his expression unreadable at first. The idea was unprecedented. His father would surely disapprove. Yet he too had felt a pang of sorrow seeing the garden wither. He remembered his grandmother, a kind woman, and her love for those roses. Lily's plea was simple, honest. It bypassed the years of bitterness. It spoke to a shared heritage, a shared loss. He looked at Lily, truly saw her for the first time. He saw not an enemy but a cousin with a hopeful heart. After a long moment of silence, Julian nodded slowly. "All right," he said, his voice quiet, "let's try." It was a small word, but it felt momentous. It was the first crack in the wall of silence that had divided their families for so long. Their alliance was fragile, tentative. They were two young people, children of a bitter feud, stepping onto forbidden ground. They were unsure of what they would find, but they were united by a common purpose: to save the Montgomery Rose Garden. Section 8. Tending to the past, conversations in the soil. Their first days in the garden were awkward. Julian and Lily worked side by side, mostly in silence. They pulled weeds. They pruned the dead and diseased branches from the rose bushes. The physical labour was hard. The emotional landscape was even harder to navigate. They were strangers, bound by blood, but separated by years of unspoken animosity. The ghosts of their father's quarrel seemed to linger in the overgrown corners of the garden. As they toiled under the sun, clearing away the neglect, they began to talk. Tentatively at first, they spoke of the roses, of their grandmother. Then, slowly, carefully, they began to speak of their fathers. Lily shared her father's lingering sadness. Julian spoke of his father's stern adherence to tradition. They discovered that the stories they had been told about the other side were incomplete. They were shaded by years of pain and misunderstanding. One afternoon, while clearing a particularly stubborn patch of thorns, Julian found an old, rusted locket. Inside, faded but still visible, was a tiny photograph of Arthur and Thomas as young boys, arms around each other, smiling. Lily gasped when she saw it. It was a relic from a forgotten time, a time before the bitterness. Holding it, they felt the depth of what had been lost. They were close once, Lily whispered, her eyes filled with a new understanding. This discovery opened the door to deeper conversations. They spoke of the inheritance, the different values. They realized that the feud was not a simple case of right and wrong. It was a tragedy of miscommunication, of pride and of deep, unhealed wounds. As they nurtured the struggling roses, they were also tending to the roots of their family's pain. They were unearthing the past, not to assign blame, but to understand, to forgive, to... Section 9. Blossoms of Hope, a Future Reclaimed. Weeks turned into months. Julian and Lily worked tirelessly in the Montgomery rose garden. Slowly, miraculously, the garden began to respond. New green shoots appeared on the pruned bushes. Tiny buds began to form. The soil, once hard and barren, became rich and dark under their care. The air, once heavy with decay, started to carry the faint, sweet promise of roses. The transformation of the garden mirrored a change within Julian and Lily themselves. Their fathers, Arthur and Thomas, eventually learned of their children's secret collaboration. Arthur was stern at first, Thomas was quietly surprised, but neither man forbade it. Perhaps they saw a reflection of their own mother in the children's efforts. Perhaps the sight of new life in the beloved garden stirred something long dormant within them. One afternoon, Thomas walked to the edge of the garden. He saw Lily and Julian laughing. He didn't approach, but a small smile touched his lips. Later, Arthur was seen looking out at the reviving blooms, a thoughtful expression on his face. The day the first new rose opened, a vibrant crimson felt like a victory. It was a symbol of hope. It was a testament to what could be achieved when old grudges were set aside. The garden was not yet restored to its full glory, but it was alive. It was breathing, and so was the connection between the two young Montgomery cousins. They had not only saved the roses, they had started to heal the rift in their family. The Montgomery legacy, once defined by feuds and bitterness, was beginning to change. Julian and Lily had planted new seeds, seeds of understanding, forgiveness and renewed connection. The path to full reconciliation for Arthur and Thomas would be long, but the work in the garden had opened a door. Blackwood Manor still stood, but its whispers were changing. They now carried a hint of laughter, a touch of hope. The enduring bonds of family, though strained, were proving to be stronger than any quarrel. New blossoms were finally emerging.